Welcome to More Than Meets the Eye, working with students with visual impairments. This is a presentation provided by the California School for the Blind. It is intended as a primer on the topic for educators who are new to this population or need a refresher. The title of More Than Meets the Eye picks up on a theme of this presentation, that working with students with visual impairments can be complex and requires careful consideration and collaboration. This presentation was recorded in 2019. If you are watching the presentation in the future, you may wish to consult with a vision professional to ensure that this information is up to date and includes the best practices of the time. We will begin our presentation with a subtopic. What is vision impairment? In this section, we will introduce concepts of ocular and brain-based vision impairments. We will cover topics such as the impact of severity and age of onset, the California Education Code definition of visual impairment, and the definition of legal blindness. The latest statistics, available from 2017, suggest that about 0.8% of children, or 63,357 students in the United States, have a visual impairment. This means that most educators will encounter students with visual impairments in their career, and that they will need to be equipped with knowledge and tools to support these students.
One parameter when considering visual impairment is whether a child is born with the impairment, this is called congenital, or whether a child acquires the visual impairment at some point in their life, this is called adventitious. These two groups may experience very different developmental trajectories. Generally speaking, children who have vision during the early critical years of development experience a more typical developmental sequence than those who are born without vision. Congenital visual impairment can be associated with atypical development in the areas of cognition, language, motor, and social skills. Another parameter to be considered is the severity of the child's visual impairment. Visual impairments exist along a spectrum from so-called low vision, which refers to students who have some degree of usable vision, to complete blindness, which refers to students who have no usable vision. Some students with low vision, when given appropriate magnification tools, actually use vision as their primary sensory channel and rely on vision for academic learning too. Others may use vision for navigation in familiar environments and everyday tasks like dressing or bathing, but they need to supplement with auditory and tactile supports for academic learning. Those who are blind must use tactile and auditory modalities for academic and everyday living tasks. The California Education Code provides definitions for various IEP eligibility categories, including visual impairment. It is defined as visual impairment, including blindness, means an impairment in vision that, even with correction, adversely affects a child's educational performance. The term includes both partial sight and blindness. As you can see, this is a vague definition with no numerical cutoffs or specific criteria given. The definition allows for an IEP team-based decision led by the educational vision specialist who reports on the impact of the vision impairment on the student's learning. In contrast to the educational criteria, legal blindness is a concept used by the DMV and other government agencies to qualify people for appropriate services or as a decision-making tool. The first part of the legal blindness definition is visual acuity of 20/200 or less in the better seeing eye with best conventional correction. Let's break that down. First, visual acuity refers to visual sharpness, how clearly you can see an image, item, or word. People with normal vision have 20/20 vision. A person with 20/200 vision would have to be 20 feet from an object to see it with the same clarity that someone with normal vision could see from 200 feet away. Second, the definition says that the 20/200 cutoff is in the better seeing eye. Since our eyes work together to see, both eyes need to have acuity measurements of 20/200 or worse in order to be considered legally blind. Third, the definition says with best available correction. This means that the 2200 acuity needs to be the person's vision as measured with their glasses or contact lenses already on. If they have 2200 vision without glasses, but glasses correct their vision to a sharper acuity, they would not be considered legally blind. A second consideration for legal blindness is a visual field of 20 degrees or less in the better seeing eye. People with typical vision have full visual fields. That means they can see above, below, and to both sides of their body. If an individual's visual fields are significantly limited, they may be considered legally blind even if they have 20/20 acuity. A visual field of 20 degrees or less, sometimes called tunnel vision, is the threshold for field-based legal blindness eligibility.
That information may have seemed very abstract and hard to imagine. How does a student with different degrees and types of visual impairment really see the world? Let's look at an example. At the center of the screen, there is an image of a vase of flowers and two sculptures, one of a rooster and another of a fish. This image is presented in 20/20 acuity. If you have normal vision, you can see this image clearly. Just above that, in the top center of the screen, the same image is presented in 20/80 acuity. The image appears blurrier and less crisp, but it would still be possible to discern the items included in the picture, particularly if this was a familiar scene. A person who sees the world with 20/80 acuity would not be considered legally blind. However, they may be eligible for an IEP under the category vision impairment, particularly if vision was found to be impacting their educational progress. In the top right corner, the same image is presented in 2200 acuity. As you may remember, this was the threshold for legal blindness. Anyone who sees at the 2200 level or worse can be considered legally blind. Compared to the 20/80 image, the 2200 image appears even blurrier and less crisp. It may be difficult to discern some of the items in the picture, particularly if this scene was unfamiliar. Just below that, the image is presented in 2400 acuity. As we continue to look at decreases in acuity, the image becomes increasingly blurry. Colors are still apparent, but shapes lack the clarity and crispness to be discerned easily. In the bottom right-hand corner, the image is presented in 2800 acuity. Now the image is so blurry that it would be very difficult to discern much more than the color. Though this is our last example of images displayed in specific acuities, many students with visual impairments have their acuity measured as far worse than 2800. In the bottom center of the screen is an example of right hemianopsia. You can also have left hemianopsia, which is the inverse of this image. Hemianopsia involves either the right or left visual field being significantly impaired. Acuity may be 20/20 in the remaining visual field. At the bottom left corner of the screen is the image presented with a 20-degree field. The center of the image is quite clear, but all peripheral information is missing or blurry. Just above that, the image is presented with a 10-degree field. Now the crisp center portion of the image is quite small, and most of the peripheral details are missing. Finally, in the top left corner is an example of central scotoma. Central scotomas act in the opposite way that a field loss does. A person with a central scotoma may have good peripheral vision, but significant impairments in their central vision. So far, we've been focused on ocular visual impairments, which refer to visual impairments caused by one or more parts of the eyes not functioning properly. However, there is another category of visual impairments, brain-based visual impairments. These are sight problems caused by problems with how the brain processes visual information. Sometimes the acronym CVI is used. CVI can stand for cortical visual impairment or cerebral visual impairment. It's possible for a student to have just an ocular visual impairment, just a brain-based visual impairment, or both. Neurological injury, acquired or congenital, is typically the cause of CVI. Students with CVI often demonstrate a puzzling, complex set of symptoms and behaviors that can be difficult for educators to understand. One example is fluctuating vision. Students with CVI may seem to see things at one time, but not at another. Things like slight shifts in lighting or positioning may significantly affect their ability to interpret visual information. They may pass a standard vision screening that does not capture the CVI issues. So how would you know if your student might have CVI? For some, they may come to you with a diagnosis. However, many students with CVI are not diagnosed for a variety of reasons. Here are some things to look for when you're wondering if a student may have CVI. It often co-occurs with neurological disorders, such as seizure disorders, traumatic brain injuries, cerebral palsy, brain tumors, and other types of brain damage. It's common in children who were born extremely prematurely, often defined as before 28 weeks gestation. It's common in children with genetic syndromes that have neurological implications, and it may co-occur with any other disabling conditions, such as ASD, intellectual disability, or learning disabilities. This slide presents a sampling of the many conditions that can cause visual impairments. Without going over these in detail, it gives a sense of the variety and number of medical diagnoses associated with visual impairment.
The next section of our presentation is called Who is Your Team? Let's talk about the vision professionals on an IEP team. There are 3 vision specialists on the IEP team. The TVI, Teacher of the Visually Impaired, sometimes now referred to as TSVI, Teacher of Students with Visual Impairment. The Orientation and Mobility Specialist, more commonly known as O&M Specialist. And the Brailleist or Braille transcriber, who may be a paraprofessional in the classroom. Let's talk a little more about what TVIs or TSVIs do. A TVI might work on Braille reading instruction and/or tactile development, assistive technologies, adaptation of materials, determination of classroom accommodations, community resources, and consultation with all other IEP staff. An orientation and mobility specialist might work on cane skills, assistive mobility devices or AMDs, street crossings and public transit skills, navigation, using navigation technologies, and community skills such as shopping and scheduling paratransit. A Brailleist, transcriber, or paraprofessional might work on adapting materials to a tactile medium, and they may do this in advance or on the fly, preparing tactile graphics, procuring existing Braille or tactile graphics from libraries, making classroom environments accessible, including setting up organizational systems, and the support of regular use of assistive technology.
Now that we've learned about our team, the next section of the presentation focuses on tools and strategies. Unless you're a vision professional, you likely won't be responsible for these interventions or tools, but they are useful to know about in order to serve visually impaired students appropriately. One thing that pops into many people's minds when they think about vision impairment is Braille. You may have seen Braille throughout your environment, such as on elevators and signs in public buildings. First, it's important to understand that Braille is not a language. Braille is a way of writing down a spoken language, just like our alphabet is a way of writing down a spoken language. There are Braille systems for many languages throughout the world. English-speaking countries now use a system called UEB, or Unified English Braille. This means that if a Braille reader goes to a UEB country, they will be able to read all signs and written materials easily. Braille has 2 main subcomponents. First, there is an alphabetic system. This system has a one-to-one correspondence with our alphabetic system. If you wanted to write your name, you would simply look up each letter of your name and Braille the appropriate character for each one. There are symbols for every letter of the alphabet, numbers, and punctuation marks. Braille also has a system of contractions. Some of these contractions are for whole words. For example, there is one character for the word like or the word every. Instead of writing these words out letter by letter, you could just write one symbol for the whole word. There are also symbols for parts of words, like the ing ending on verbs. Some students only learn to read the alphabetic or uncontracted form of Braille, but most people learn contractions as well because it saves time in both reading and writing. It has been estimated that only 10% of school-aged youth with visual impairments read Braille fluently. There are many reasons for this. For many students, they have sufficient usable vision that they can read print, albeit in an enlarged or magnified format. These students are unlikely to learn Braille unless their vision is likely to decline in the future. Some students have significant intellectual limitations and may not have the cognitive capacity to learn to read. Some students have learning disabilities like dyslexia or reading disability, so learning the complex Braille code may be difficult for them. Some students have motoric limitations, such as those with cerebral palsy, which limits their volitional control over their hands and arms and makes Braille reading difficult. Other students have tactile limitations due to neurological issues or because they are tactile defensive. These students may also not learn to read Braille effectively.
Think about all of the materials in your classroom that include visual components: maps, charts, pictures, tables, graphs, and diagrams. All are important learning aids. Unfortunately, it's hard to make these accessible to students with visual impairments by using tactile graphics. Tactile graphics are used to convey visual information by using raised surfaces so that a visually impaired person can feel them. On this slide, there is an embossed image of a human cell. Straight lines point to the brailled names of the structures within the cell. But how would you know those straight lines aren't part of the cell? Without sufficient verbal explanation, a student might think that a cell is a circular object with spiky protuberances. When a sighted person looks at a diagram of a cell, it's likely that the first thing they notice is the circular boundary, the cell wall. They can make sense of the diagram as small bits called organelles inside of a larger structure. However, because a visually impaired person may not be able to feel the entire diagram at once, they may miss the idea of circular enclosure or boundary. Tactile graphics are not obvious or intuitive. Vision gives the whole, the gestalt. Tactile perception involves feeling bits and then trying to make them cohere in a whole that makes sense. Students need instruction in how to approach tactile graphics. They represent a challenge in relating parts to wholes and wholes to parts. Beware of handing out tactile graphics and assuming that students can comprehend what you want them to comprehend. Puffy paint and wiki sticks are often used to make tactile graphics accessible. They outline the image on the paper using a medium that can be felt by the student with visual impairment. Let's imagine a blind kindergarten student. Her classroom aide outlines the pictures on the kindergarten workshops with puffy paint. Today, the class is working on words that begin with the letter N. The first image on the left is given to her and presented as a nose. Now, our kindergartner knows what a nose is. She's felt her own nose, the noses of her family members, her dolls, maybe her friends. When she feels the puffy paint on the first image, she asks, "Why is that triangle a nose?" On the next day's worksheet, the middle image is presented as a nose. And the kindergartner asks, "Why is the little circle on the side of the big circle a nose?" And then when she's given the last image, she asks, "Why does that one have two noses?" This example shows that there's a need to try to ascertain what your blind or low vision student is actually experiencing. Only in this way can you determine whether additional verbal descriptions or aids are needed to support understanding.
After what you've heard about the challenges of tactile graphics, you may be wondering about manipulatives. They seem so accessible to students with vision impairments, don't they? Let's imagine the same kindergarten classroom. The teacher is introducing a lesson about elephants and shows a photograph of an elephant to the class. For all of the sighted kindergartners, even if they have never seen or heard of elephants before, they can learn a great deal about elephants from this one image. They can learn that elephants are large, larger than people, alive, have gray, brown, wrinkly skin, big floppy ears, a long nose, and pointy horns on their face. The teacher realizes that this image is not accessible to her blind student, so she hands her student a manipulative, a small plastic elephant from the toy bin. If the student receives no additional accommodations or verbal explanations, she may walk away from the lesson with some significant misconceptions about elephants. She may think, elephants fit in the palm of my hand and they are inanimate objects. Worse still, if the teacher hands a cartoonish manipulative like this stuffed animal to the student, they may have an even poorer understanding of elephants. Perhaps the student could compare this toy with their teddy bears at home and come to the conclusion that what makes elephants different from teddies is that they have bigger ears. But what about next week when she plays with this stuffed mouse and thinks it's an elephant? Or she may think that what makes elephants different from teddies is their long nose, but only until she meets the anteater toy in a future lesson. The bottom line is that making visual materials accessible is hard. Simple fixes are often misguided, and it's very important to consult with a TVI in material selection and adaptation. What may seem intuitive or obvious to a sighted educator may lead to significant misunderstandings and misconceptions on the part of a student with a visual impairment. For students with low vision, large print is a common intervention. Large print refers to enlarged font sizes, such as what is possible on a word processor. The particular font size that a child uses is typically determined based on optometrist recommendations and degree of visual impairment. When choosing font styles, sans serif fonts are generally easier for students with visual impairments to read than are fonts with serifs. But what about items you can't enlarge, like a textbook or a form at the doctor's office? In these cases, magnification can be a solution. There are many tools to magnify text or images with. First is a CCTV, which stands for closed caption television. A CCTV works by projecting images or text onto a monitor for a student to read. A camera is mounted below the monitor, and books or other items are laid on a tray. The student can use a knob or buttons on the monitor to zoom in or out on the image or text. Next is software like ZoomText. ZoomText enlarges all of the words and icons on a computer screen to a level determined by the user. It not only enlarges words and text, but also the mouse cursor, making computer use much more accessible for students with low vision. Finally, a low-tech magnification tool is a dome magnifier. Using curved glass, the dome magnifier enlarges text below. Domes of different shapes and sizes can enlarge to different degrees. Giving students access to these tools means they can access the curriculum even when it is not available in a large print format.
At the California School for the Blind, students use a variety of assistive technologies. Two of the most common at this point are JAWS and the Braille Note. Let's start with JAWS, which stands for Jobs Access with Speech. It's a computer screen reader program that allows visually impaired users to read the screen with a text-to-speech output. Please click the link on your screen or in the text box below to see a demonstration of JAWS. Another assistive technology often used at the California School for the Blind is the Braille Note. A Braille Note is a tablet designed for people with visual impairments. It has a Braille keyboard, a speech synthesizer, and a refreshable Braille display. A refreshable Braille display can show a number of Braille characters from the screen. It's also refreshable. That is, it changes continuously as the user moves the cursor around to read different parts of a document or website. The Braille note can function as a word processor in Braille, can write or read documents, and newer models connect to the internet for access to websites. Please click on the link on your screen or in the text box below to see a demonstration of the Braille note. Many students with visual impairment now have access to assistive technology through their own smartphones and tablets. Increasingly, phones, tablets, and computers have embedded accessibility features that are available to individuals with visual impairments. The white cane functions as an assistive device for mobility and navigation and as a signifier of visual impairment. While the white cane is a tool for scanning the environment for obstacles or landmarks, it also alerts others in the community that the bearer does not have access to visual cues in the environment. Alternative mobility devices, or AMDs, are constructed for children who do not yet have the motor skills to manipulate a white cane. AMDs are adaptations that offer more stability and are often fashioned specifically for the individual child's needs. In the name of safety, children with visual impairments may be discouraged from food preparation and cooking. Parents fear cuts, burns, and trips to the emergency room. But there are a number of adaptive devices that greatly reduce risk. For cutting, there are nylon knives, rocker knives, and smooth-edge can openers. To avoid burns, there are Braille markers for stoves and ovens, long-sleeved kitchen mitts, and liquid level indicators. The latter can be placed on the side of a cup into which a hot beverage is poured. When the liquid hits the level just below the cup lip, it starts beeping. It isn't necessary to use a finger to determine when the cup is full and potentially be burned. Talking measuring cups, Braille-labeled cups and spoons, Braille timers, and specialized bottle openers are additional aids in the kitchen.
Staying organized can be tricky for all students, but students with visual impairments may need extra supports to get organized. At home, families can support students with visual impairments by setting up organizational systems. Here are two examples of clothing organizational systems. By attaching a small tactile marker to clean clothes, the individual with a visual impairment is better able to select appropriate and matching clothing items and can coordinate outfits independently. Another space in the home that can benefit from additional organization is the kitchen. Many families encourage their children to help out with household chores, such as emptying the dishwasher. With a few simple tweaks, such as Braille labels on a silverware organizer and bins labeled with their contents, children can help unload the dishwasher independently. Staying organized at school is another consideration. Many classrooms have organizational systems set up, such as bins of different colors or labeled shelves. Teachers can work with their vision specialists to ensure that these organizational systems are accessible to students with visual impairments. For example, this teacher used multicolored bins to organize her art supplies. To support accessibility, she affixed one sample of each bin item to the exterior, making a great tactile marker for a young student. Braille labels could also be helpful in a situation like this. But how do we support a student's organization of their own materials? As we noted earlier, there are many tools that a student may use to access the curriculum, and it's important for the student to have a reliable place to find and return these items. It's often helpful for a student with a visual impairment to have an empty desk beside them for storage. Here's a desktop organizer. There are Braille labels on different compartments. Having an organizational tool like this available ensures that the student takes responsibility for their own tools and aids in their self-esteem and independence in the long run, as they learn to feel self-reliant throughout their school day. The expanded core curriculum is a concept that is unique to the education of students with visual impairments. The diagram on the screen shows a circular puzzle, with a center portion labeled Core Academics and 9 puzzle pieces surrounding it to create a large ring. The expanded core curriculum addresses areas of development and learning that need to be considered in program planning for students with visual impairments. These include sensory efficiency, which includes teaching students to use their senses effectively and efficiently to support their learning, Assistive Technology, which involves teaching students about the main technologies available to support their learning and daily living. Orientation and Mobility, which focuses on safe and efficient travel throughout the environment. Social Interaction, which includes the teaching of social skills and how to discern social cues in the absence of vision. Recreation and Leisure, which involves exposing students to activities that are accessible and teaching modifications to inaccessible activities. Independent Living, which focuses on personal, financial, and home management skills. Self-determination, which includes decision-making, self-advocacy, and individual responsibility. Career Education, which involves teaching students about the various types of career options and the skills necessary to achieve personal goals. And lastly, Compensatory Access, which focuses on the skills needed to access the curriculum, such as literacy skills, listening skills, and tactile skills. Educating students in all applicable areas of the ECC is imperative for their future success.
Experiential learning is one way to ensure that multiple areas of the ECC are addressed. Many concepts are difficult to grasp solely through tactual and auditory means. For example, what is a fence to a blind child? It may feel like wooden slats, chain link, or wrought iron. It may be knee-high, waist-high, shoulder-high, or even taller. And how do you convey that concept of enclosure, which is the main function of a fence? Do you walk the child around a football field, a park, a backyard, and then a chicken yard? Clearly, the simple concept of fence becomes very hard to convey, yet a sighted child can grasp it in one glance. Even a bright, curious, and very capable student may show surprising gaps in his or her knowledge. The Paths to Literacy website has a number of anecdotes that illustrate this point. One in particular involved an elementary student in general education during a classroom lesson on farming. The speaker discussed crops and barn animals at some length. The student with visual impairment raised his hand and asked, "Do they use ladders to feed the pigs?" Needless to say, the speaker and class were surprised. It turns out the student had heard that pigs live in the sky, sky, phonetically similar words that had confused him. And he had also heard the expression, "when pigs fly." He made the inference that pigs, like birds, fly and live in upper regions. The misunderstanding was soon clarified, but this is an example of the need for experiential learning. The student did what we hope all students would do. He listened to the lesson, tried to integrate new information with his previous knowledge, and he formulated a question. Do they use ladders to feed the pigs? Perhaps if the student had had more experience visiting farms and interacting with animals, this misunderstanding would have been prevented. While enriched experiences with appropriate verbal description and explanation are to be encouraged, there are a number of things that can limit or impede learning, and clearly these should be avoided. Many learning opportunities are impacted by over-reliance on aides or paraprofessionals. Worksheets may appear on a student's desk, seeming to come out of nowhere, and then are whisked away, returning to nowhere. The organizational systems mentioned earlier in this video need to be set up with the student's participation so that all materials can be located by the student and returned to their proper location by the student. This encourages independence. Students with visual impairment often have strong rote verbal learning skills. A child may be able to recite their multiplication facts with accuracy and ease, but may not be able to apply this knowledge in solving a word problem. Don't mistake rote fluency for conceptual understanding. In the name of safety and protection, many students are deprived of opportunities to learn about the world and to develop problem-solving skills. If a student is handed items that fall to the floor, he or she will not develop or learn systematic search patterns. If cane, jacket, backpack are all handed to a student, reliable patterns of handling personal belongings will not be established. Overprotection, which was discussed earlier with regard to cuts and burns in the kitchen, can be an impediment to skill development, independence, and self-advocacy, all of which are essential for a competent adulthood. Excessive hand-over-hand assistance can also be problematic. Children need to explore an object and its function to truly grasp what it is. Having another person put his or her hands on an object does not accomplish this. Joint tactile exploration, a gentle joint use of a manipulative toy or cause and effect toy may be more effective. Children can become resistant to having their hands taken if this comes to feel coercive. A few words here about the impact of visual impairment on students with more severe disabilities. Classrooms and learning environments for the severely disabled generally rely heavily on visual learning. These students are often concrete thinkers who may not have symbolic or representational thinking. The concrete is typically visual. Tactile learning in the moderate to severe special day class is often limited because of sensory and motor limitations such as you see in cerebral palsy. Auditory learning is limited because students may be pre-verbal or have limited language skills. In these circumstances, cognition can be difficult to characterize, and students may not be able to communicate what they can or cannot see. Here are some ideas for working with this type of student. Use of repetition and routine is essential. It permits the student to anticipate upcoming events and the sequence of an activity such as eating or toileting. After many repetitions, the student may be able to participate in the activity, for example, by pushing his or her arm through a sleeve or locating a snack. If the same script is used repetitively with an activity, receptive language is reinforced. The use of object symbols can also be effective. A spoon may be used as an object symbol representing snack or lunch. The spoon is handed to the student to indicate it's time for lunch, receptive communication, or the student hands it to a staff member as a request for food, which is expressive communication. A number of object symbols can be established as a simple communication system. Sensory engagement, particularly vestibular and proprioceptive, often elicits student attention and participation. This is important to develop social awareness and more intentional behavior. These students often engage in self-stimulatory behaviors, which can be reduced through frequent breaks with sensory and motor activities. Because their cognitive abilities are often hard to characterize, it is important to ensure appropriate assessment, programming, and placement. The term deafblindness refers to dual sensory impairments and may range from mild impairments in hearing and vision to complete blindness and deafness. Even a child with low vision and a mild hearing impairment may be considered deafblind, particularly if the combination of sensory impairments has a significant educational impact. Typically, students with deafblindness have a one-to-one support person called an intervener. Interveners generally provide direct hands-on support, education to others about the needs of the learner with deafblindness, social skills development and facilitating relationships, if necessary, concept development, and opportunities for communication through tactile signing or Braille.
We've just spent a lot of time talking about tools, strategies, and instructional methods. When you're not a vision specialist, what can you do to ensure that your classroom is ready for a student with a visual impairment? One great suggestion is to invite the student's TVI and/or O&M specialist to give a presentation to your class. They could even include the student. This presentation could include having other students try a simulation of the student's vision impairment to build empathy and to aid understanding. The student themselves could provide suggestions to their peers about which supports are helpful and which are not. Another suggestion is to work with the TVI before the school year begins to make sure your classroom is accessible. This includes even simple considerations, such as where the student will be sitting relative to the classroom entrance and to lighting sources. A great TVI will help you make all of these decisions. Recess can be a very tricky time for students with visual impairments. Unlike classrooms, which are contained and predictable, recess can be chaotic and fast-moving. Having a recess buddy who helps the student with visual impairment find their friends and modify the games for accessibility could make recess a much more pleasant experience. Students with visual impairments can miss out on a lot of incidental visual information. In the classroom, this could manifest as not knowing who has their hand up when the teacher asks a question. The student may be wondering, am I the only person who doesn't know the answer? The simple act of commenting on how many students raise their hand could make this aspect of classroom functioning transparent to the student with a visual impairment. Some syndromes associated with vision impairment are associated with problems with continence, sleep, and temperature. Being aware of these medical complications can ensure that the student is safe and healthy during their school day. Modern classrooms are fast-moving places. There is often a rush to get to the next lesson or activity. For the student with a visual impairment, try to prioritize independent completion of tasks, such as putting on a jacket before recess. Sometimes we may be tempted to support these tasks to speed the process, but it's important to give students a chance to build independence in these moments. Often our students with visual impairments develop strong verbal memory skills. Sometimes the ability to memorize can mask a lack of understanding. For example, a child might be able to quickly list multiplication facts and seem to have mastered the concept. However, on further analysis, the student may not be able to apply these skills to word problems. Always delve deeper in your assessments to ensure that the conceptual learning is present. Thank you for watching our presentation, More Than Meets the Eye, Working with Students with Visual Impairments. We hope it was helpful. Should you have questions or need further support, please visit our website at csb-cde.ca.gov or call us at 510-794-3800.